Welcome to the Unbounded podcast series, where we help you attain new levels of performance and well-being by learning about the human mind.
In this podcast today, we're going to look at strong, authentic leadership and the role of the mind in strong, authentic leadership. So you might want to think about someone that you know or you've come across who you would consider strong and authentic. What are the attributes, what are the behaviors that they tend to exhibit? So let's just look at strong to start off with, someone that has strong leadership. They appear confident. They seem to have a clarity about them. They do take on board others' opinions, but they're very clear and grounded in what they think and where they come from. And then there's the authentic element. So there's an authenticity to their style. And the key to that is that it's natural. So I want to talk to you first of all about then the difference between persona and what we would call true self. So the true self is who you really are. We'll talk about that a little later in more detail, but the true self, who you really are when you're being natural. And the persona is who we think we need to be. So we think we need to be a certain way, and that then shapes the style and the approach that we come across. Now, what actually people then perceive is what we would call the personality, which is how others perceive us, whether we're being our true self or whether we're being our persona. And the fascinating thing about this is that there's quite a difference between true self and persona. There's only a slight difference really in what's going on in your mind, but the vibe that it gives off is dramatically different. So the question is, where does the persona come from? Where does the persona come from? Well, the persona comes from thought. A lot of people, when they come into the business world to start off with, they have thinking that gets in the way that says, I need to be a certain way. I need to be professional. I need to look sorted. I need to look confident. I want to be liked. I know less than others, perhaps, and so I need to work hard to prove myself. So there's all sorts of thoughts that people can have that then develop and shift their style to be a certain way. So when I have thinking that says I need to be professional or I mustn't show my emotions, then of course what that does is it shapes my being and my behaviors in a certain way. I'm more rigid. There's more of a structure to then how I might come across that isn't authentic, isn't so natural. And when someone is living and existing from that persona, we often pick it up. We often pick up that the person is trying too hard or hard to connect with. They're overcompensating. We pick these things up at some sort of level. We pick up a vibe from their approach. The question is, who are you really? And what we're looking at and suggesting to you is that there is a natural built-in style that you've got, the true self. It's like being in flow state. So you may be familiar with the term flow state. So being in flow, and in sports, people call it being in the zone. When you're doing something in the zone, you're doing it naturally, effortlessly. Think of a top footballer, top soccer player, scoring a penalty from flow, from the zone state. They do it effortlessly, naturally. They're not thinking about what they're doing. They're not trying very hard. They're just in this flow state. Same with a top tennis player when they are doing the backhand down the line. When they overthink, they often tighten up and make mistake. But actually in this flow state, they have this natural, effortless style that enables them to perform well and to perform very naturally. And that's what we're pointing to really with the true self is there's an authenticity and a nature to it that's very easy. So we have some questions for you on that topic really to look at and say, when are you in flow? When are you in flow? Are you in flow when you are presenting? Are you in flow when you're talking to your boss? Are you in flow when you are working really hard on a difficult problem? And how does it feel? And how does it come across? Hopefully you can relate to some of the things I'm suggesting to you.
So if we think about what's going on psychologically for us when we're in that flow state, when we're in the zone, there tends to be much less thinking that we have about ourselves, about I. So it's almost as though there's a selflessness to it. We're not having a lot of personal thinking going on. And that's not something that occurs with effort. So we're not willing ourselves to not think about ourselves, but it just seems to happen almost automatically that when we're in that flow state, when we're in the zone, there just tends to be not much thought coming through about us and, how we're coming across or, what our persona's like, what other people might be thinking about us, how I should naturally be as a strong, authentic leader.
And that's contrary to what a lot of people think about leadership. They read a lot of leadership books and decide they need to develop certain behaviors or approaches. And what we're suggesting from our teaching about the mind is we're suggesting that there's an easier, more natural way, because the power and strength of leadership and authenticity comes through when there isn't much thought going on about what I need to be or how I'm coming across.
And so the thing about trying to behave in a certain way or follow certain behavioural prescriptions is that takes psychological effort. So we have to apply, there's something to apply, there's something to remember to do. And, I guess a lot of us will have come across the top 5 behaviours to, for an effective leader and that sort of thing. And when you read them, they all make sense to you. And they're behaviours that we perhaps might aspire to have. However, when we're trying to apply those behaviours or remember to do them, what happens is it takes us out of that state of flow because it just creates more thinking in our minds. And so we're acting less naturally.
And the thing that we're pointing to here is that strong, authentic leadership is natural for everybody. Whoever you are, you have it within you as part of your natural built-in design. And this really people find empowering and exciting because no longer have we got to read another book and try and become another style or approach. We just have to embrace who we are naturally and what we have as our natural built-in design within us. By strong, we don't mean being a certain type of leader all of the time, one style. With the authenticity comes a natural style.
And I guess how I've seen that show up in terms of the leaders that we've worked with over the years is that often what will happen is that a strong, authentic leader who's coming from that sort of natural space it's almost like they're grounded, yet there's a flex in their style. So, they're much more focused on dealing with whatever comes up in the moment. So there will be times where they will be quite assertive and challenging with people and their team and, even more directive. And then there'll be other times where there's a much lighter touch and they know that less is more. And so they will flex that depending on what insights they have in the moment about what's needed. So when we're coming from the space of authenticity, what comes through from that is a natural strength.
So really what we're suggesting to people is to focus on authenticity, on a authentic, natural style of leadership, because when one is that, the strength and the power and the gravitas automatically flows through. We sometimes talk about outside in versus inside out as a leadership style. So a leader that is outside in is one that is very focused on the outside, focused on things that are outside of them for their leadership. So what do others think? What does my boss think? What does the data say? What are the competition doing? An inside-out leader is more focused on inside of themselves. They're looking for what their own wisdom says. They're looking for the answer inside them. They're looking for what they think and what they know to be true. And of course, we want to get information from the outside. It would make sense to look at data. It would make sense to sometimes gain perspective and opinion from others. But the key and the critical thing is that when you've collected that, you go inside to work out what you think you should do. Often we find that leaders lose their own power and their own strength because they're so focused on and worried about what others are thinking or what the data says. And they lose that compass inside. You might like to think of a tree. There's a beautiful tree in my garden, actually, a London plane. It's magnificent, it's huge, it's got this wonderful, strong trunk with roots that spread a very long way. The outside tries to push it over. The weather comes along. We live quite near the Solent in the UK, so there's a lot of wind coming, southwesterly winds, trying to push and blow that tree all over the place. And the weather has some impact. It's blowing it around, it knocks some of the branches down and so on and so on. But there's a strength to that tree that comes from the roots, comes from inside it. It has the ability to flex and to sway with what's going on outside, but it stays really grounded in the process of whatever it does.
So the question is, how do we stay grounded, maintain that strong, authentic leadership? And so one of the practical things that we've found with a lot of the leaders that we've worked with is that space to think seems to be something that is often lacking. Their days are generally filled back to back with meetings and appointments, and there's very, very rarely any time in the day to actually have 10 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour to just have the time and space to think or to even to not think.
So there's creating the space to think, and then there's looking inside for the clarity of what you believe and what you know you want to do. Yes, having taken on outside perspective and opinion or data, but having the space and the time to go inside to work out and decipher the answer that you want to follow, the thing that you want to do. It's creating the conditions for yourself to know what you want to be strong and authentic about. And for us, this is a key element of the strong and authentic leadership. And of course, in today's world, we see so many people running around back-to-back meetings all day, every day. It can lose their strength, it can lose their authenticity, it can lose their ability then to actually work out what they want to do and how they want to do things.
Because when we're back to back with meetings, when we've got one after the other and there isn't that time to just be in a reflective open space, what happens is that our aperture to this sort of wisdom or intelligence seems to really close down. So it's almost like they're just in a room with constant noise and the mind is just constantly really busy and there's no space for anything else to come through.
I'd like to give you an example of a client that we've worked with recently. This is a guy that works in the technology sector. He is a middle manager. He's very successful. He was Oxford educated, Oxford University, very intelligent guy, really had some insight and knowledge that was really powerful. And yet he had some thinking that got in the way. He had some thinking that he was quite young in his career. I think he was early 30s. He had some thinking that others knew better. He had some thinking that his bosses were way more experienced than him. So there was some sort of implicit, well, who am I to challenge? Who am I to say what really I think? And we would see him in meetings and he would end up often being the note taker. He'd take notes and he would play a role in the meeting, but it was a really subservient role that he played. And if one of his bosses had a strong opinion, he'd always just go with it, even if he had suggested something else in the first place. And we worked with him over a period of time, teaching him some elements of what we're talking about now, about the mind and how it works and a lot about thought. And he had some really powerful insights. And last time we saw him, he was totally different in how he operated. He was going inside more for the answer. He was taking on board what others said, but he somehow found this strength inside him to notice what his opinion was and to share from it. And that's really a beautiful example of what we're inviting you to do more and more. I'd like to give you another example of a very successful chief executive in a finance business that we have worked with. And this person is amazing. They've got this incredible, charismatic, polished style. They're very good looking. Everything seemed perfect about this individual. It turned out that it was actually a persona that they'd been developing. They'd left university and they'd come into the working world, and they'd really thought they just needed to be a certain way. Everything needed to be perfect and sorted. It meant that some of this person's people in the organization couldn't connect to this chief executive, didn't have much rapport with them, and so on. And so actually, this leader was able to just realize that he was trying too hard, and that in being so polished and so amazing as a chief executive, he had lost something about his ability to connect with others and have others follow him. So through realizing what thought was doing and what he'd done in building up this persona, he was able to just realize that he actually wasn't being his natural self. And the person that he was in his private life, when he was playing with his kids or mucking about with friends that he grew up with, was the real true self. And he found a way very quickly of starting to collapse the persona and start to be more natural in how he lived and operated, regardless of where it was in his life.
So a couple of things for our listeners to be aware of. Firstly, we'd like to invite you to just be aware of and notice when you might be feeling like you're grounded. So when do you feel strong and authentic and really grounded in where you're at and what you're saying and how you're behaving? And when are you not? And there's something in the noticing of that can help us regroup and reground ourselves. And then the other thing is just to notice what it feels like when it feels like you might be trying. So where there's psychological effort involved to lead or to be the person that you think you ought to be as a leader, and just really when it feels like you're trying too hard. And when does it feel like you're in clarity? And when does it feel like you're looking to the outside to either get more analysis or seek, other people's opinions versus that sense of feeling grounded and clarity within yourself?
So the last point I'd like to remind our listeners to end with is what we're suggesting to you is that you have strong, authentic leadership as a natural part of who you are. There's nothing to do or nowhere to try and get. There's just to focus inside and be natural.
To find out more about our work with individuals, teams and organisations, please visit www.thepragmagroup.com, or if you'd like to connect, email us at info@thepragmagroup.com.